out an entirely new cyber army. And this time, Doctor, it will be invincible.
Destroy them! Destroy them at once!
What are they?
Cybermen.
I've seen them before.
What are they?
Cybermen. It's a Cyberman. A Mondasian Cyberman. Shoot him. Good dog.
Welcome back to the Nerdy Grail, and welcome to another ranking every episode from something Doctor Who related. So ages ago I did a ranking every Master episode, and I did that in relation to Wishworld and Reality War, thinking that perhaps the Master might make a sudden appearance in that episode. Obviously that never ended up happening, and that was a bit of wishful thinking. And then after that I did a ranking every episode from every Doctor series, which I have now completed. So if you want to check out those videos, then please feel free to do so. But continuing on the theme of ranking episodes from a certain villain or monster saga, I decided to do my second favourite villain in this episode, that being the Cybermen, because I adore the Cybermen. They are a fantastic villain that has spanned across pretty much almost every single incarnation of the Doctor. There is a couple of incarnations that didn't get a Cyberman story, such as obviously John Pertwee, the War Doctor didn't get one, the 8th Doctor didn't get one in terms of TV appearances now. Obviously Christopher Eccleston's 9th Doctor didn't get one, and obviously recently now Ncuti Gatwa's 15th Doctor never faced the Cybermen either. But all the rest of the Doctors had a plethora of different Cybermen stories. They've changed in design over the years, and all the designs have been unique, different, and I've just adored their concept. And so it had to be done, a ranking of every Cyberman story. But before I quickly jump into it, I do want to just preface that firstly, this is my personal opinion, and so obviously everyone's list is going to be different, and if I rank a Cyberman story lower than you would, then that's perfectly fine, and if I rank one higher than you would, then that's also fine as well. But also another rule for this is, in terms of what I count as a Cyberman episode, I mean that they have to be like the core antagonist or threat in that particular story. I'm not counting just cameo appearances. So, for example, stories like A Good Man Goes to War, or their, kind of longer cameo in stories like The Pandorica Opens, I'm not counting in this list. It will only be if the Cyberman is in the story from the start to the finish, and they are pretty much the core antagonist for that episode. But without any further ado, let's jump straight into this ranking of every single Cyberman story in Doctor Who. Right, so here is my ranking of every Cyberman story in my personal opinion. So we got 5 different categories on here. We've got the best. So these are the stories where the Cybermen are at their strongest. They are used in the best way possible, and are like the biggest threat. Then you got great stories, good stories, meh. So these are stories that are just okay, where maybe the Cybermen weren't as used as strongly as they could be, but they weren't too bad. And then the bad ones, so the category this one is that the Cybermen either could have been swapped out for another villain and it wouldn't have really impacted the plot, or maybe they just weren't used very effectively, or didn't feel very threatening, or sort of lost the charm that they used to have in the early days, or maybe the more modern take of it had changed too much. There is a couple of cases of this, as you're going to see through the video, but without any further ado, let's not ramble on any longer. Let's jump straight into this list, starting with the 10th planet. Also, if you hear my voice breaking a little bit, I am coming down with a bit of a cold, so I do apologise. But we've got the 10th planet, which for me, it's not the best of the best, but I adore the Mondasian Cybermen, and I think they have like the creepiest and eeriest design of the lot, because they're supposed to be us that are like augmented and evolved, changed, they've removed the emotions, because they think that they're doing us a favour. And so I really like that. I really like the cloth faces. I like that they still got fully human hands. The way they speak is obviously quite funny. And how they're used in this story is done really well. You know, a new planet appears. We find out that it's actually the twin planet that was lost ages ago. It's returned to us. It's stealing our resources. They want to take everyone from Earth and put them on Mondas. You know, so they don't really want to kill people. They want to just make them like them. So it's quite interesting, really. And they're used in a variety of different ways. And I quite like that. So for me, personally, I'm going to put the 10th planet as a great story. It's not quite the best of the best, but I think it is a great story. The Moonbase. Now, I recently did an unboxing of the vinyl for the Moonbase. Terrific story. I think it's a bit weird how the Cybermen are actually used in that story. You probably could have maybe swapped them out with another generic villain, if I'm perfectly honest. You know, the Cybermen stealing bodies, they're infecting the moon base through the use of like coffee, using tampering with the sugar supply, you know, in order to steal people, convert them, take out members of the base. You know, it's all quite interesting. And I like this slight redesign that they have. They're still eerie, they're still creepy enough, and you can still identify them as us, or like a more upgraded version of us. So yeah, I like the Moonbase, don't get me wrong. Would I say it's a great story? I'm umming and ahhing. It sort of teeters between great and good for me. So for now, I'm going to put it in good, but it possibly could get upgraded to great. I know, a bit of a pun there. So we'll come back to that one, but for now, it is definitely a good story, but it could go up to great. Tomb of the Cybermen, before I even discuss why, Tomb of the Cybermen is going up in the best. Tomb of the Cybermen is, hands down, I think, the best Cyberman story for the 1960s era of the show. It was the very first Cyberman story I ever watched, and it is solid from start to finish. You know, you've got this group of researchers who've gone to Telos in order to find the remains of the Cybermen and do some experiments on them, see what makes them tick. You know, and I think it's done really well. And the Cybermen break out of their tombs, you know, and start, you know, stealing people, converting them. You know, there's a great cast of characters. The Cyber Controller is also really menacing. Even though he has that weird dome Bob the Builder style hat on his head, I think that always stood out to me a lot. But he was creepy and eerie. You know, the claustrophobic feel you get of the tombs as well. The electronic-y, static-y voices that they have are eerie. They got a slight redesign from the Moonbase, but they sort of kept that template the same. I quite like it overall. It's very fast-paced as well. Lots of fantastic good scenes. Definitely would recommend Tomb of the Cybermen. Potentially as a first Cyberman story for people as well. It is fantastic and a lot of fun. Highly recommend it. The Wheel in Space, for me, is kind of... I'm going to put it in meh. Because it's got some interesting-esque ideas, and there was a plot line beforehand that apparently it was going to be a Dalek and a Cyberman story, which that would have been great to have. But it's sort of like the Moonbase, but done worse. So I'm not a huge fan. And also the design of the Cybermen as well is not the best. I'm really not a fan. It's sort of a halfway point between the Moonbase and Tomb Cybermen, and then the design that we get then in the next story, The Invasion. It's sort of like a combination of those two. and I'm not a huge fan of it. Also, the voices for the Cybermen feel really odd. They sound a bit like how I feel right now. They sound as if they've got a really nasty cold or cough and they can't really talk properly. It sounds bizarre and it's really jarring. And the Cybermen are just, they come and go. You sort of forget that they're there at times. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of what I've seen of The Wheel in Space, although I would like it to eventually get a full animation or to be fully found so that maybe my opinion on it might change a little bit. It does teeter between meh and bad. I'm going to be a little bit nicer because there is stories that are definitely going in bad that I think are definitely worse in terms of using the Cybermen as The Wheel in Space does. The Invasion, I think, is a great Cyberman story. Ages ago, I might have said that it would have been on par or better than Tomb, but no, if I'm being perfectly honest, it is a fantastic story. Really good when the Cybermen eventually get into it, but the problem is they spend first half of the story, the first 4 parts to be exact, where the Cybermen are not even actually in the story, and I think that is a big problem. The design is quite nice. I like the how they look with the slightly squarer heads. I think that's quite cool. I think the bottom half of them is a little bit weird, especially with like the moon boot style things have changed. Not a huge fan of that. It's got iconic scenes of them in the sewers and coming out of St. Paul's Cathedral. They got a mixture of voices. They use like the modulation from Tomb of the Cybermen and Moonbase, but also a brand new one, which again almost looks like they're trying to incorporate the Wheel in Space one as well, which you know my thoughts on that. The Cybermen are threatening, conquering all of London, a proper invasion fleet, so they do use them. As they say on the tin in the title, the invasion they are invading. It is like the Dalek invasion of Earth, but for Cybermen, but starting on a smaller scale of London. I do really like it. I like Unit versing the Cybermen. It's fantastic. I just think being an 8-part story was a bit of a mistake for it and sort of let it down a little bit. And also the Cybermen at times get a bit overshadowed by their human accomplice that they're using, who's fantastic, by the way, but he sort of does steal the show at times a little bit. But overall, it is a great story. Revenge of the Cybermen. For me, this is meh. I know some people would probably go that Revenge of the Cybermen is bad. But look, I'm going to cut some slack. I think it's okay. And keep in mind, that's what meh is. We've got the best, great, good. Meh is okay. So these ones are okay. Yes, they don't do the Cybermen the best. This is the only story for the 70s era of the Cybermen on screen, which is very disappointing. I do agree they are way too emotional in this. There's times where the Cyber Leader in particular, he shows like extreme cases of anger, desperation, annoyance. He shows more humanity than what most Cybermen are supposed to do, which is sort of really jarring. The design of the Cybermen is both great and terrible at the same time. If you look at them from the front, they look terrific. I don't even mind the slightly bendy tube, the earpieces things. They got the handles. And the chest piece reminds me a lot, obviously it goes back harking to the early 60s variants, but the back is really weird. They got this like piping that goes into this like almost like dial on the back, and it looks a bit like a hunchback almost on the back, but not quite. It's quite a weird sort of twist of it. I'm not really sure what they were going with, so it's really weird to look at. In terms of how they're used, it's nice that they give them a proper weakness. You've got this whole thing around them being weak to gold, and so they're invading the space station Nerva in order to try and put bombs on it and invade Voga, destroy the planet of gold, so then they can win the cyber war and conquer the universe. So the theming wise, it's there and it's done well, but I think in terms of the design of the Cybermen and the overall emotional state that they put them through in that story, is very lackluster, and also they do shift focus from the Cybermen a lot and focus more on the Vogans, and it gets very political, which is nothing wrong with that, and obviously Doctor Who's always been kind of like that, but the Cybermen, you want to focus on the Cybermen, and they don't really properly come into it until part 2, really, towards the end of part 2 even. So it's a bit of a shame. Earthshock, I mean, we can all agree Earthshock is also one of the best Cybermen stories ever put to screen, including the modern era of the show as well. This was the second Cyberman story I ever watched. I think it is just amazing. They had such a long gap because they didn't come back then for the rest of the Tom Baker era. They did a fantastic job. The part 1 cliffhanger, which I did put a little clip at the start of this video on, is also fantastic. It's such a surprise when you see them. Their new redesign for the 80s, I think, is fantastic. You know, it's just all round really good. And it's a very claustrophobic feeling episode because the Cybermen are invading this space freighter and they're planning on crashing it into Earth to try and destroy Earth, which I think, you know, is quite extreme. You know, and they practically succeed. If it wasn't for Adric sacrificing himself, they would have succeeded in their plan, you know, and it had one of the biggest impacts on the show, you know. Obviously, you did have technically companion deaths with Katarina and stuff in the Hartnell era, but in terms of being truly recognisable and one that had a lasting impact then into the modern era and one that hadn't been lost to time, Earthshock with Adric was the true, for a lot of people, first companion death, and yeah, did have a lasting impact. And so that made the Cybermen really menacing, that they were able to take out someone so close to the Doctor, and I think it's really good. And also the Cyber Leader's speeches, David Banks does a fantastic job as the Cyber Leader and is great for the 80s era of the show. I love it. Earthshock, terrific. Like Tomb, highly recommend watching Earthshock. Then you've got the 5 Doctors. Now, I included the 5 Doctors because technically the Cybermen, like the Master, are in the story quite a bit and do play a lot of impact into the story. Teaming up with the Master, threatening to blow up the TARDIS, putting bombs and all around it, you know. They are in there enough to where I warrant it. But in terms, obviously I'm ranking this in terms of like their usefulness and effectiveness, so I'm only going to put the 5 Doctors in good. If I want to talk about the 5 Doctors as a story in general, I would say the 5 Doctors is probably great stroke the best. But in terms of using the Cybermen, I think it's just good. They do them in a much better way than Revenge and Wheel, I think, do. And obviously it's that 80s era and they are menacing and they are a threat, you know, and they are someone that the Doctor fears, and the Master even has to try and, you know, get on their side because he's worried that they could take him out, and he manipulates them, which happens a lot in the modern era of the show, the Master and the Cybermen. But yeah, obviously they're not the core focus, but they are like one of the core villains of the story. Then we've got Attack of the Cybermen, the Colin Baker one, which for me, I also think is a good story. I know some people have said that Attack of the Cybermen is probably like a meh to a bad, but no, I think the Attack of the Cybermen is a fairly solid one for what it's worth, if I'm perfectly honest. I quite like it. I like, you know, it's almost like a celebration of the Cybermen in a way, because it's sort of like a sequel to the 10th Planet and also a bit of a sequel to the Tomb of the Cybermen, because you've got the Cyber Controller back from Tomb of the Cybermen. You've got the Cybermen using time travel, this, that and the other, in order to try and prevent Mondas from being destroyed in the 10th Planet. You know, there's a big celebration of stuff in this story. The Cybermen end up in the sewers at one point, harking back to the invasion. You know, there's a lot going on that you get to see the tombs of the Cybermen again as well. You know, I think it's really terrific. And the Cybermen always feel like they are, you know, the core antagonist. They don't get stuff taken away from the return of Lytton or the new creations of the Cryons, which are beautiful, by the way. You know, they are still front and centre, and they are threatening, and they are really good. And some great new redesigns of some Cybermen as well, like the Stealth Cyberman, I think is terrific. The Cyber Controller getting a bit of a redesign using the 80s look with the big dome on the top of his head. I think that's all really good as well. The infected rogue Cybermen with webbing everywhere as well. I think that's really good. There's lots of good designed Cybermen in this, and I quite like it. So I think it is a good story. Silver Nemesis for me is like Revenge. It's kind of a bit meh. I know, I think it's because they tried a lot of things which they just threw at the wall and hoped they would stick. But the problem is the Cybermen aren't like the core focus of this story. You know, it's supposed to be the 25th anniversary story, you know, hence why it's called Silver, and then use Cybermen because of the colour scheme and stuff. But when you've got like Lady Painfort and her accomplice and neo-Nazis and then the Cybermen, there's too much going on, and one of these things needs to give. And unfortunately, the Cybermen take a massive back foot because of that. And Lady Painfort is probably more of the core villain than the Cybermen. And the Cybermen get defeated way too easily. It's a very cool scene, don't get me wrong, in part 3 when Ace takes out a load of Cybermen using some gold coins and a slingshot. I think it's fantastic. Ace takes out the Daleks and the Cybermen in terrific form in season 25, but it does make them look a bit weak, you know, and the Doctor tricks them very easily. Yeah, they're just not used the best, and their 80s design is starting to look a bit rubbish now. They gave them another slight redesign, making them look a bit more clear. They made their hands like big, gigantic fingers, which look just really weird. Yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of how they were implemented in this story, if I'm perfectly honest. And so for me, that's why it's kind of meh. Moving then into the modern era of the show, we've got The Rise of Cybermen and Age of Steel. I think this is a great story and a great introduction for the Cybermen into the modern era of the show. And they tried to do it from almost like to not impact the canon of the Cybermen, so to speak, because the Doctor, Mickey, and Rose travel to a parallel universe where the Cybermen are, you know, they're not from Mondas. They are being built here on Earth by a human who is trying to find a way of prolonging his own life, and so uses like this technology to upgrade parts of the body, turning people who maybe are ill or in need, or, you know, he sometimes steals homeless people, tricks homeless people in order to use them for a conversion process as a way of prolonging his own life. He does become a Cyberman at the end, becoming the new cyber controller. His name is John Lumick. It's just done in a brilliant way, and the design of the Cybermen is done really, really well. In the modern era of the show, I do admit they do start to become more like just generic robots. They sort of lose their human touch, but I think in this particular story, they still hold on to that a little bit more, especially when you see some examples like in part 2, Age of Steel, when the Doctor is actually talking to one where he turns the inhibitor off and actually gets to communicate with them. And the side we find out it's a woman who, you know, is looking for her partner, her husband or whatever. It's very, very sad. You know, you see Jackie get converted, parallel world Jackie. There's lots of emotional stakes in this as well. So I think it's done really well. Then we've got Army of Ghosts and Doomsday. Now, the problem I have with Army of Ghosts and Doomsday, this is going to be controversial, but you've got to really hear me out. I think in terms of the Cybermen, in terms of this, it's only going to go in meh. Now, hear me out. The story, Army of Ghosts and Doomsday, is terrific. I think it's fantastic, and it's great that we finally got what we were originally supposed to get in The Wheel in Space, the Daleks versus the Cybermen. But we can all agree the Cybermen were treated horrendously when the Daleks came into it. They were made a laughingstock. The Cybermen couldn't hold a candle to the Daleks. There's even lines in Doomsday where Dalek Sec, you know the scene I'm talking about, says that there's basically only one thing that you are superior at, and the Cyber leader asks, what is it? And Dalek says, you are better at dying. You know, and it's true. When there's two Cybermen talking to a Dalek, they're having a bit of a back and forth conversation, proposing an alliance. Dalek says no. Cyberman shoots Dalek. Dalek just gets a little bit phased, then shoots the Cybermen dead clean with one shot. They are made to be laughingstocks in this story. They start off good in Army of Ghosts, but then when the Daleks come in, they are wiped the floor of, and they are no longer menacing. They are just, like I said multiple times, a laughingstock, and I'm really disappointed in that. And like I said, I am ranking these stories also based on how well the Cybermen are used in the story. They are not used very well in Doomsday. They start off strong in Army of Ghosts, but then they fall really flat in Doomsday. So keep that in mind. I'm not saying that Army of Ghosts and Doomsday is a bad story or a mess story. I am just saying the Cybermen are used quite meh in that story. They could even teeter into bad, but yeah, definitely at least meh. In terms of the story, I'd probably put Army-Ghost and Doomsday into the great category, to be honest. Then we've got The Next Doctor. Now, I'm actually going to put this into good because of how unique they are and how uniquely they are used in this particular story. They are really manipulative in this story, and there's lots of great variations to the Cybermen as well that match the theme of the episode, like Victorian-esque London style. There's this gigantic factory, which basically it becomes a Cyberman, this giant Cyber King, I think they call it. You've got the Cyber Shades, which are like these animalistic creature variants of the Cybermen. I think some of the new redesigns of the Cyber Leader with the new coloured faceplate and the brain exposed, I think looks really, really cool. And the way that they trick the main female antagonist into becoming the new Cyber Queen, Cyber Leader, whatever you want to call her, I think is done really, really well. The way they were able to manipulate this guy, Jackson Lake, into, you know, being traumatized and how he believes he's the Doctor. Because that's kind of what this story is all about. Is there's this fake Doctor running around and the real Doctor's got to try and solve what's going on. When the Cybermen have actually kidnapped his son and are using him in the cyber factories. And he's using the trauma and all. He uses this little identity thing from the Doctor, and it's used to cloud like the trauma of losing his son. It's really, really good. I quite like it. It's not great or anything, but I like the uniqueness of it. Closing time. Closing time, for me, again, I think closing time is also meh. I love the new designs of the cyber mats. I think they're really cool. But let's be real, it's just all it is in this story is it's a couple of Cybermen hiding in the basement of a shopping mall, repairing themselves, and they get defeated by the power of love. It's very cringy. The Cybermen don't actually do an awful lot. It's actually mostly the Cyber Mat, and you're mostly just following the story of the Doctor and Craig. So yeah, it's kind of disappointing if I'm perfectly honest. So yeah, I'm not a massive fan of Closing Time in terms of the Cybermen. As a story, I'd probably say it's good. It wouldn't be great, but it'd be good. But in terms of the Cybermen, I think it's quite meh. There's other stuff they could have done, really, with the Cybermen. Nightmare in Silver is going in bad. Yeah, that might... I don't know if that's going to, like, hurt some people or shock some people. Yeah, it's bad. Not just for the Cybermen, the story itself is bad. I mean... Angie and Artie are the most annoying characters I've ever seen on screen in the Doctor Who universe. The Cybermen are no longer anything to do with what they used to be. They've taken away their creepy factor. They are just generic robots in this. They're able to like remove their hands. They're able to take their heads fully off. They can turn their heads 360. They can freeze time. You know, they upgrade themselves every 5 seconds. It's just not the Cybermen that I know and I love. And that is really frustrating and really disappointing. And it is a far cry from the stories like Tomb of the Cybermen, Earthshock, you know, Rise of the Cybermen, stuff like that. Basically, all the stories in the top 2 to 3 categories. It is just such a shame. You know, Matt Smith is great. You know, Mr. Clever is fantastic. The setting of a theme park, I think, is quite nice. But just the Cybermen were the letdown of the story. And they are your antagonists. They are your threat for the story. And if your threat is bad, your story is bad. I'm sorry. Then you've got Dark Water and Death in Heaven. Again, meh. For me, this is meh. Because the first part of the story, the Cybermen only come in it at the end. And then the second part, they play massively second fiddle to Missy, stroke the Master. You know, they don't do an awful lot, apart from the fact that they take down the unit plane. They then spend the rest of the story just walking slowly through a graveyard, trying to wake up, and they don't really do an awful lot. At times, you sort of forget that this is actually a Cyberman story. If it wasn't for Cyber Danny, you would forget that this is a Cyberman story. But this does teeter into being more of just a master story. And yeah, that was just such a shame for me. You will find with me that I do much prefer the classic series Cybermen to the modern era Cybermen. However, World Enough and Time and The Doctor Falls is going up here. World Enough and Time and The Doctor Falls is debatably probably one of my favourites. Well, if you've seen like my top 10 modern era of Doctor Who, you know my thoughts on World Enough and Time and Doctor Falls. I absolutely adore this story. The Cybermen back on form for the first time in a long time in the modern era. They are fantastic. It is definitely Moffat's best Cyberman story. It is done really well. They bring back the Mondasian Cybermen from the 10th planet, but give them a slight upgrade. They still got the creepiness. You learn all about their origins and how they came to be, and it's done in a fantastic way. The Cybermen in Part 2, even though it's also a multi-master story, it's also a multi-Cyberman story because they incorporate the parallel universe Cybermen and the Cybermen I don't like from Nightmare in Silver. But they do it in a much better way. They're a lot more threatening. You feel the fear of losing loved ones. The Doctor loses Bill. The Doctor is trying to save this bunch of children from being converted into Cybermen. It is terrifying. It is scary. It is just done superbly. I love World Enough and Time and The Doctor Falls. Fantastic Cyberman story. Highly recommend it. I would also say The Haunting of Villa Diodati, this might shock some people, is actually really great. The Cyberman is the lone Cyberman that Captain Jack predicted earlier in the series, and comes into the story probably about 15 minutes before the end. So like 20 to 15 minutes before the end. So the first like half of the story doesn't have the Cyberman in. But when the Cyberman appears, it's really scary and is like half converted. It's not fully complete. But it is terrifying, and you feel that this one Cyberman can do a lot of harm, can do a lot of damage, and needs to be stopped at all costs. And I always like the fact that it's overly emotional. It does it right, whereas Revenge of the Cybermen, they are fully converted Cybermen, so shouldn't be experiencing those emotions, whereas here, it's still only half converted, so you understand the emotions, and the emotional overload is even more scary because of the robotic voice that it has. I love Haunting of Villa Diodati. I think it is a fantastic story. It is great. And the Cyberman that's used is used in a very good way and is used to further a plot thread from earlier and then does start off a two-part Cyberman story then going forward very well. Speaking of which, we've got Ascension of the Cybermen and The Timeless Children. In terms of the Cybermen, for me, if I'm being honest, it's tough because I think it is probably meh. They're not really done the best, if I'm honest, in this story. I might even I'm going to actually be harsh, and I'm going to teeter into bad. Because the Cyber Masters, oh my goodness. I hate the Cyber Masters with a passion. I hate it. They're disgusting. Their design is awful. Absolutely awful. They play major second fiddle to the Master. Ashad was such a great creation in Haunting of Villa Diodati, and it flops dramatically then in the last two parts. Ascension of the Cybermen as well, with the floating weird heads. I miss the Cybermats. I don't like those floating heads. I think they're too weird. Just not the best, if I'm honest. Just awful. And the Master does obviously take top priority in part 2, along with the Timeless Children stuff. And then the power of the Doctor, I've added because the Cybermen are quite a core threat, and Ashad does come back. They invade UNIT. This is just meh. It is better than Timeless Children, but in terms of what the Cybermen actually put into the story, again, the Cybermasters are bad, but at least you've got Ashad a lot more in this one. And you've got the Cyber Warriors, which are used a little bit more than the Cybermasters, so I like that. I don't mind the Cyber Warriors, but yeah. But that is my ranking of every core Cyberman story, you know, where the Cybermen are the core antagonists. It's going to be a pretty divisive list, I think. It's definitely going to cause a little bit of controversy, I think, at times. But just keep in mind, be respectful. This is just my list and my personal opinion. And this is just how I think the Cybermen were best iterated through the era and used. But if you did enjoy this video, please like it by giving it a thumbs up. And comment down below your thoughts on the Cybermen stories. Maybe even give me your own list. I would love to hear it. And subscribe if you are new. Now, in terms of what monster I might do in the next ranking video, I think, well, since we've done the Master and we've done the Cybermen, I think we might as well, before I move on to the more obscure ones, let's finish off the big trio. So in the next one, when I do one of these, we will rank every single Dalek story. But for now, this is the Nerdy Grail signing off. I hope you've had an amazing day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye for now, everyone.